Ray Franz takes up the story with his precarious situation in 1979 and 80. It has been mentioned that from about 1978 onward, a changed climate began to manifest itself in the body. The initial euphoria that accompanied the dramatic change in the administration had faded. He's speaking there, of course, of the creation of the governing body in the years 1971 and 72, and how that euphoria led to a period of some flexibility, new wineskins as it were. But within 6 years, everything had changed. The spirit of brotherly comradeship that seemed to prevail for a time, along with its accompanying expressions of moderation, greater flexibility and viewpoint, had also noticeably diminished. The members had settled into their respective positions on the various committees, and after a time there seemed to be some muscle flexing shown on the part of certain ones. Fairly discernible lines began to be evident within the membership, so that it was often not difficult to foresee what the vote was likely to be on an issue. If, for example, the hands of Milton Henschel, Fred Franz, Ted Jarras, or Lloyd Barry went up, one could generally be sure that the hands of Cary Barber, Martin Petzinger, William Jackson, George Gangas, Grant Suter, and Jack Barr would go up as well. If the hands of the former stayed down, the hands of the latter would generally stay down also. Some others would likely vote with these, but their vote was not as predictable. With rare exceptions, this pattern prevailed. The pattern held particularly true if any traditional policy or position was under discussion. One could know beforehand those members who would almost certainly vote in favor of maintaining that traditional policy and against any change therein. Even if in the case of the alternative service issue already discussed in a previous chapter, although here outnumbered, these members were still able to prevent a 2/3 majority vote from altering the position on that issue. In certain controversial cases, there seemed to be at least some evidence of lobbying on the part of some members. I felt that if anyone wanted to present information apart from the actual session, the better way was to put it in writing and submit copies to all members. Then at least everyone heard the same thing, and in effect, the cards were all on the table. But such written submissions were actually quite rare, and when made were seldom discussed to any extent. So Ray Franz's experience is the same as many people who've risen up through organizations and ended up at the top, but found that at the top, government boards of directors always act in similar ways. So he then points to a specific meeting, the beginning of the trauma, as it were. November 14th, 1979, Franz says, I believe this meeting was a precursor to the traumatic events that violently shook the headquarters in the spring of 1980, resulting in a number of members on the staff being disfellowshipped for apostasy, and also my own resignation from the body and from the headquarters staff. That day we handled 4 minor issues, each motion carried unanimously. Any sense of harmony that might have existed was quickly broken by a jarring note. Grant Suter said he wished to bring up a matter about which he stated there was considerable gossip. He said that he had heard reports that some members of the governing body and the writing department had given talks in which they made comments not in accord with society teaching, and that this was causing confusion. He had also heard, he said, that within the headquarters family staff, some were making expressions such as, quote, "When King Saul dies, then things will change." A likely reference to the president. But by 1979, this was no longer true. The president really did not have the powers he had had before 1976. I had never heard anyone in the headquarters family make such a remark. Grant Suter did not say where he obtained his information or who was the source of the gossip he referred to, but he became very intense, and both his words and facial expressions reflected strong and heated emotion. And for the first time, the term apostasy surfaced in a governing body session. Considerable discussion followed, with most members indicating that they were hearing such things for the first time. In my own expression, I stated that I had given talks all over the United States and in many countries, and that in not one of them had I ever made statements contradicting public teachings of the organization. It was rare that talks by a governing body member would not be taped by at least someone, and had anything been said out of line, the evidence would be there. In that case, I pointed out, the body would surely not have to rely on rumor to know about it, or someone would certainly write in about it, asking questions. I asked if Grant Suiter knew personally of any such case on the part of a member of the body or the writing department. His comment was simply that these matters were being talked about, and that some branch committee members attending seminars at the headquarters had said they were confused because they had heard some conflicting views from those conducting classes. The decision was that the teaching committee, which had oversight of the seminars, should investigate. At a later session, they reported that they had found no evidence of the things spoken of, that the only confusion among branchmen was about a point developed in a class conducted by governing body member Cary Barber. He dealt with Christ's kingdom having commenced in 33 CE, upon the ascension of Christ to heaven, and some had difficulty in reconciling this with the teaching about 1914. The resolution of the matter was an agreement that all governing body members would exercise care when on speaking assignments. It was clearly stated in the session, however, that this did not imply any attempt to control private conversations by the members as among personal friends. The latter stand did not hold up under test. I found the discussion significant. Although Grant Suiter had not indicated knowing of any case where a governing body member had, when on assignment, made comments contrary to published teachings, I knew that some could have been cited. The body had already considered the occasion of Albert Schroeder's visit to some European branches and his advancing the view that the expression "this generation" might have a meaning different from the published one. Word had reached us about this from more than one place. It was also known that the president, Ray Franz, had introduced a new view regarding the keys of the kingdom, referred to at Matthew 16, when teaching certain classes of the Gilead School, a view that contradicted published teachings of the organization. This had been done without previous consultation with the body, and the view was presented not as a suggestion, but as the correct view. Entire classes of Gilead graduates went to their assignments with this new view that none of the rest of the brotherhood had even heard about. And of course, some of you will have heard Ray Franz's Gilead address before that, when he expressed reservations about the governing body concept itself, and even used Acts 13 through 15 to prove that the Antioch congregation, where Paul and Barnabas were commissioned to their missionary work, knew nothing about the centralization of the governing body in Jerusalem. Here we must cite a parallel with Jerry Gladson that I mentioned in the previous segment. Theologian's Journey from Seventh-day Adventism to Mainstream Christianity. And in this book, Jerry Gladson talks about a similar experience he had in the rigidification of a religion that once had flexibility. Desmond Ford's experience as well. Jerry Gladson explains it this way. If God is truly leading Adventism more than any other body, would not this remarkable fact bolster every theological, ethical, or ecclesiastical policy? Would God allow his chosen people to be misled in theology? Now that's the reasoning of the Seventh-day Adventist leadership. Such reasoning, of course, amounts to extending an inerrant or infallible assertion to both theology and ecclesiology. In other words, transferring inerrancy and infallibility from God to men. It absolutizes a theological system. My personal experience over more than 30 years as an Adventist confirms this impression. During that time, to my knowledge, the denomination never formally altered an official doctrine. The denomination's theology seems to lie beyond the pale of revision, like some monument carved in eternal stone. I often wondered why the denomination could not be more flexible and willing to change in the light of fresh discoveries. So Gladson confirms what Franz and Ford had already found out, that tradition, rejecting tradition, only leads to the creation of new tradition. And that seems to be a universal truth. So we'll carry on Ray Franz's experience in coming segments.